They said, "We'll give you a moment alone with your husband." But when I stepped away to wipe my face, I heard the sound of the coffin lid closing. Just like that. No warning, no farewell. The hinges clacked softly, and when I turned back, the man I'd spent 51 years beside was already gone from view. I didn't say anything right then, just stood there, staring at the polished wood, at the white lilies lying too neat across the top. My hands still held the letter I was going to slip inside. A small thing. A memory about the day we met. A dumb little poem I wrote. He used to laugh at my poems, but he kept them all in his desk. I thought he'd like one last one. But they closed it. Quietly, efficiently, like I was just a guest at someone else's funeral. I glanced at the director, a young man in a shiny suit, and he gave me one of those professional smiles. I remember thinking, he doesn't even know George's name, just a slot in a schedule. Brett, my youngest, stood off to the side with that stiff posture he'd adopted in recent years, like he was always defending himself before anyone accused him. And Laura, his wife, kept her eyes on her phone, probably coordinating the lunch that followed. "People need to eat," she'd said earlier when I asked if maybe the reception could be a little smaller. "Grief burns calories." I stood there until someone gently touched my elbow. "Mrs. Hale," the assistant said, "we're about to transport the casket." I didn't move. Couldn't, really. I looked down at my shoes, low black ones I hadn't worn since George's retirement party. That night, we danced on the back porch until mosquitoes ran us indoors. I don't even know why I put those shoes on. Maybe I thought he'd notice. I stepped aside, watched them wheel him away like luggage, and I remember thinking, this is what the end looks like. Not in a hospital bed, not in whispers and morphine. This is it. A moment you don't get back. A lid you didn't ask to close. Back at the house, everything smelled of furniture polish and store-bought flowers. People talked around me, not to me. Laura had hired a catering company without asking me, and every tray was something George never ate. "We didn't have time to consult you," she'd said. "We wanted it done right." Her version of right never matched his life. I stood in the hallway and watched as people moved through our home like it was a hotel lobby. The grandchildren looked bored. Brett gave a speech about legacy, called George a man of quiet resilience, and I almost laughed. George was loud. Not in a rude way, he just filled a room. He hated pretense, liked his eggs runny, and danced when nobody asked him to. When people left, I found myself in the kitchen, washing dishes that weren't even mine. Laura had brought her own platters, even though our cabinets were full. "I didn't want to burden you," she'd said. But the sink still filled with plates. At some point, Brett came in. He looked tired, but not like grief-tired, just annoyed. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, voice already halfway out the door. "I didn't get to say goodbye," I said, still holding a wet glass. He blinked. "You had time." "They gave you a moment." "No," I said. "They gave me a closing." He didn't respond, just nodded like he was checking a box. Later, I heard him telling someone on the phone, "Yeah, it went fine. Smooth, actually." Smooth. That night, I sat alone in our bedroom. His side of the bed already looked too neat. George always slept like a child, half off the mattress, blankets in a knot. I took his pillow and held it close, but it already smelled more like dust than him. I didn't cry. That surprised me. What I felt wasn't sorrow. It was something else. Like a rope had been quietly pulled from under me while I wasn't looking. Not grief. Displacement. They closed the lid without me, without asking. And in doing so, something shifted. Not just George's presence, but mine. I had a sudden, sharp thought. This house doesn't feel like mine anymore. And that was the moment something old in me cracked, and something older stepped forward. I met George when I was 21 and tired of pretending I liked nice boys. He wasn't particularly handsome. His nose had a crooked ridge from a high school baseball injury. But his laugh was something else. It came from deep inside, like a muscle that had been well used all his life. He asked me out by walking up to the bakery counter where I worked and saying, "I know this is forward, but you look like the kind of woman who'd never settle for dry pie." I didn't smile. I handed him a slice of peach crumble and said, "Then don't waste my time." We were married 6 months later. The years that followed weren't always kind, but they were honest. George worked at the same auto repair shop for 37 years. I cleaned houses until Brett was born, then started my own small laundry service out of our garage. It paid for groceries and winter boots and the odd vacation. We made do. We made it work. He called me Mert, only ever with a grin. The kids would roll their eyes when we slow danced to Sam Cooke in the living room. But George never cared about appearances. He said love was a verb, and he proved it every single day. After he retired, he built a small bench in the garden, sat there every evening sipping lukewarm tea, staring at the hydrangeas like they were paintings. "They don't complain," he'd say. "Don't gossip. Just bloom." The last 2 years were harder. He had trouble walking. The bathroom trips became longer, the steps slower. But we adjusted. I moved our bedroom downstairs, installed rails, learned how to fold his pants so they'd slip on easier. He never said thank you. Not because he wasn't grateful, but because we didn't speak like that. Not about small things. We just did them. When the diagnosis came, pancreatic, late stage, I didn't cry in the office. I took the brochures, asked the right questions, nodded while the doctor talked about comfort measures. George didn't look at me. He just kept staring at the floor tiles. But when we got in the car, he finally said, "So, no more hydrangeas, huh?" "No," I said, keeping my hands on the wheel. "But they'll bloom without you." He reached over and squeezed my knee. The last 6 weeks passed in a fog of appointments, morphine, and visitors. Neighbors dropped off casseroles. Brett came often at first, full of advice and articles he printed from the internet. Laura brought supplements, talked about alkaline diets. She never once asked George what he wanted. He didn't want smoothies. He wanted toast. Plain, with butter. Our oldest, Meryl, lives in Oregon. She called twice a week, her voice strained, guilty. "I wish I could fly in, Mom. I'm just swamped with work." I didn't pressure her. That's the thing about motherhood. You learn to expect nothing and give anyway. George asked for fewer people toward the end. "I want quiet," he said one night. "Just you." The night he passed, the nurse was in the kitchen making tea. I was sitting by the bed, reading aloud from a worn mystery novel he never finished. I looked up, and he was already gone, mouth relaxed, eyes half open. I didn't scream. I didn't even move. I just closed the book and placed it on the table. The funeral plans came together faster than I expected. Laura took charge, said it was easier this way. I agreed, not because I trusted her taste, but because I didn't have the energy to argue about flowers and font sizes. Brett asked if he should speak. I said yes. It felt like the right thing to say. The only request I made was that I be allowed to sit beside the casket for a few minutes before they closed it. "Of course," they said. "You'll have your moment." That was what they called it. A moment. But moments don't last. And no one ever tells you how fast they go until you hear the sound of the lid clicking shut behind you. Now, 3 days after the funeral, the house is too quiet. I keep thinking I hear him upstairs humming off-key. I go to the pantry and his favorite mug is still there, the one with the faded fishing boat. I can't bring myself to move it. I've never felt so hollow and yet so alert. I know something shifted at that funeral. Not just in my heart, but in the air. Something cracked open. Not in a tragic, poetic way. More like a drawer you didn't know was jammed until it suddenly slid free. And now that it's open, I can't pretend not to see what's inside. The first sign that something was off came in the form of a password. About a week after the funeral, I tried to log into our joint bank account, something I'd done for years to pay bills, check deposits, transfer the odd amount to the grandkids' birthdays. But this time, the login failed. Password incorrect. I tried again, and again. Then I saw the note. Account access restricted. Please contact your branch. I called the number. A woman with a high, flat voice asked for my name and date of birth. Then she said, yes, this account has been updated. You'll need to speak to Mr. Brett Hale for further access. I nearly dropped the phone. Excuse me? I asked, keeping my voice level. That's my husband's account. Joint account. My name is on every statement. The woman hesitated. Yes, ma'am. But the recent authorization added your son as primary contact after the death certificate was processed. He's the executor, correct? Yes, I said. But he doesn't live here. I do. And I need to pay the gas bill. Of course, she replied. But you'll need to speak with Mr. Hale to restore full access. I can't override the designation. I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the beige wallpaper in the dining room. We never did repaint it, though I'd mentioned it every spring. It struck me then, how quickly the shape of your life can be redrawn by someone who's not even sitting in the room. Brett came by that afternoon with 2 coffees and a pat on the back, like I was a colleague who'd just gotten over the flu. Hey, Mom, he said, stepping over the threshold without knocking. Brought your favorite, half decaf, no sweetener. I looked at the cup. I drink it black. He blinked. Oh, thought you liked the half decaf now. Laura said, I drink it black, Brett. He shrugged and set the tray down. Anyway, I figured we could go over some paperwork. Lots to take care of. Insurance, probate, the works. I've been talking to a lawyer, just streamlining things. I watched him open his laptop like he owned the table. I tried to access the bank account, I said. Oh, right. He didn't look up. Yeah, they switched the permissions. Standard stuff after a death. I'll get you added back. Just wanted to make sure things were organized first. Organized how? He glanced up then, just briefly. Mom, don't worry. You don't need to deal with all this. That's why I'm here. That sentence, it stuck with me. You don't need to deal with all this. As if I hadn't dealt with it every day for 50 years. As if George and I hadn't paid off that mortgage one thin check at a time. As if I hadn't built our laundry service from a folding table and a borrowed washer. Now suddenly, I didn't need to deal. Later that week, I overheard Laura in the hallway talking to someone on speakerphone. She didn't lower her voice. I think it'll be easier if she moves in with Meryl. She has more space, or even an assisted place nearby. Brett and I are too tied up with the boys right now, and the house is, well, you know, big. The house. My house. The same one George and I built a second bathroom into when I got tired of sharing. The one where every floorboard knew the rhythm of my step They'd already begun dividing me up like a misplaced box in an estate sale. That night, I walked through each room with a notebook, not crying, just noting the things they wouldn't understand. The chipped blue bowl we bought on our honeymoon, the crooked picture frame George refused to straighten. "It leans like us," he'd say. I found the envelope with the original deed. Both our names. Still there, still valid. I also found a stack of unopened mail, medical bills, condolence cards, and an invitation, Laura's handwriting, inviting George's colleagues to a celebration of life brunch the following weekend. I wasn't mentioned. I looked around the living room, still too clean from the catering crew, and felt a new, unfamiliar thing rising. Not anger, not even sadness. It was something closer to clarity. They were already moving on. And not just from George. From me. But I wasn't done being present. Not yet. Not quietly. Not on their schedule. The next shift came when I found a man standing in my driveway, clipboard in hand, tapping his pen like he had somewhere better to be. It was a Tuesday. I was wearing George's old flannel over my nightgown, watering the potted roses near the porch. They weren't doing well this season. Too much sun, maybe, or too little care. "Mrs. Hale?" he asked, squinting at me. "Yes?" "I'm here about the transfer papers. Mr. Hale said you'd be expecting me." "Which Mr. Hale?" I asked, though I already knew. He flipped through his clipboard. "Brett Hale. He filed for title reassignment on this property. We just need your signature to finalize it." My hand went cold. "This property is already titled," I said, stepping forward. "It's under my name and my husband's. There's nothing to reassign." The man, mid-30s, tan lines from sunglasses, glanced again at the paper. "Right. Well, looks like he's consolidating things through probate. Common practice when estates are being reorganized." I didn't respond. I simply pointed at the gate. "I suggest you leave." He raised both hands. "Hey, I'm just doing my job, ma'am." No offense meant. I waited until his car pulled out before going back inside. My knees ached and my palms were wet. Not from the hose, but from sweat. Anger was a strange thing at my age. It didn't burn hot. It settled in the stomach, quiet and heavy. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the deed again. George and I had refinanced the house only once, in the early 90s, to help Merrill through college. We paid it off before Brett even graduated high school. There was no debt, no lien, no legal reason Brett should be touching anything. I made 2 phone calls, one to the county records office, the second to Ruth Lissman, an attorney who once helped George draft a lease for one of the tenants we had in the back apartment years ago. She remembered me immediately. "Mrs. Hale? How long has it been? 20 years?" "More or less," I said. "I think I need your help again." We met the next day in her office, a cramped space above a pharmacy with dusty blinds and too many paperweights. She wore the same strong perfume I remembered, like crushed lilac and ink. "I'm being pushed out," I told her plainly. "I don't have proof yet, but they're circling. Brett, Laura, the house, the accounts. I want to make sure nothing moves without my say." Ruth adjusted her glasses. "Do you want to change your will?" "Not yet," I said. "But I want to lock the door before they come through it." She nodded. "Let's start with a declaration of sole property, then a power of attorney revocation, just in case. We'll update the estate documents. I'll make you a list of everything to pull." We went over details for over an hour. I felt tired afterward, but clear-headed. Later that week, Brett came by again, this time with the boys. He always brought them when he wanted to soften a conversation. They ran into the living room, dropping backpacks and shoes like breadcrumbs. "Hey, Mom," he said, too casually. "Got a minute?" I didn't answer. I was setting the table for 4, even though I knew Laura wouldn't come. She rarely did. "I made stew," I said instead. "Your father's recipe." He sat, clearing his throat. "Listen, I might have sent someone your way earlier this week. Some paperwork. You know how these things go." "I do," I said, placing the bowls down. "And I also know when I'm being handled." He looked up. "What?" "You didn't ask. You assumed. And then you sent a stranger to trick me into handing over my house." His face shifted, defensive, then calculating. "It's not like that, Mom. Look, it's just cleaner on paper, easier for taxes. We're trying to help you." "No," I said, sitting across from him. "You're trying to make me disappear in a way that looks polite." He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "You can eat. You can go. But you don't bring me papers again. Not without a conversation. Not without respect." The boys were already slurping stew, oblivious. Brett said nothing more that night. After they left, I locked the door. Then I took out George's old planner. I flipped through its pages, past doodles, and scratched addresses until I found a note from years ago. It read, "Call Merrill about moving back. House is too quiet." He never made that call. But I stared at the ink, faded but present, and realized something. Quiet wasn't the enemy. Erasure was, and I wasn't going to be erased. I hadn't checked my savings in months, not because I didn't care, because I assumed, in the weary way that mothers often assume, that it was being handled. George always managed the numbers. After he got sick, Brett offered to step in. "Just until he's better," he'd said. "I'll make sure everything's running smooth." Smooth. That word again. Now I logged in using a fresh password Ruth helped me set up. The first screen greeted me with a balance that looked smaller than I remembered, much smaller. I clicked through the tabs, 3 accounts, 1 checking, 1 small investment fund, and the joint savings. The one George and I built together over decades, little by little. Extra from Christmas bonuses, leftover refunds, even the $100 bills George used to fold into birthday cards for emergencies. And now? Now the ledger was full of regular monthly transfers. A $200 to Bright Steps Academy. I knew that was for the boys' private school. $350 to Sunline Auto Finance, Brett's car, most likely. $500 every month to Willow Dental Associates. Laura's Invisalign, I remembered suddenly. She said, laughing over coffee, "Can't sell a house if you don't smile with confidence." Dozens more. Groceries, travel, utilities, subscriptions to services I didn't even recognize. I scrolled back. The payments began around the same time George got his diagnosis. Brett must have added the authorizations when he took over the books. And I let it happen. That night, I pulled every bank statement from the filing cabinet in the guest room, sat on the carpet, surrounded by printed lists and fading receipts. 10 years of generosity. No, 10 years of slow erosion. There was the $3,000 for Merrill's flight during her divorce, even though she never arrived. The $5,500 Brett needed for a business opportunity that lasted all of 6 weeks. The wedding deposit Laura never thanked me for. A dozen tuition boosts, cell phone bills, therapy copays. One line even showed a payment to a retreat center with a note, "Marriage Reset." The page was full of my name. But not once in all those transactions did anyone stop and say, "Do you want this? Are you okay?" It wasn't just money, it was permission. Silent, assumed, taken for granted. The next morning, I called the bank. "I'd like to cancel all outgoing automatic payments," I said, using the firm voice I'd saved for rude customers and dishonest plumbers. The clerk stammered. "Ma'am, that's quite a few entries. Do you want to cancel all of them?" "Yes," I said. "Every single one, effective immediately. Some of these are family-linked, like health insurance." "I'm aware. And a few are educational." "I'm still aware." He cleared his throat. "Very well. It'll take a moment." I waited, breathing through my nose. I thought of George, how he used to say, "Money's just a mirror, Mert. It shows who people really are." When the call ended, I felt shaky, but not unsure. For the first time in years, I wasn't leaking. Later, I emailed Ruth with a list of the canceled accounts and scheduled a meeting. "We'll draw up the trust," I wrote. "I want to protect what's left." The next evening, Brett called. Twice. Then Laura. I didn't answer. Let them feel what silence sounds like. But just before I turned off my phone, a message buzzed through. It was from Jenny, my granddaughter. "Grandma, are you okay? Dad is freaking out about something. Just checking in. I love you." I stared at her message for a long time. Then I wrote back. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just finally putting some things in order." The bank felt colder than I remembered. Not in temperature. Something quieter, more internal. The kind of cold you feel when you've been too trusting. Too long. The woman at the front desk gave me a polite smile, then went to fetch the manager. Richard came out 5 minutes later, the same man George and I had dealt with for years. His tie was still crooked in that boyish way, but his smile faltered when he saw me. "Mrs. Hale," he said, extending his hand. "I heard you called. Is everything all right?" "No," I replied evenly. "But I'm here to fix that." He led me into his office. The glass walls let the morning light pour in, but it didn't feel warm, just exposed. I sat down, opened my notebook, and laid out every change I wanted. Ruth had helped me list them in clear order. I need all financial power of attorney removed from Brett Hale, effective immediately. I want account access reset to me alone. He shifted in his seat. "Of course, I can help with that. And I'd like to create a living trust, something protected, separate. My granddaughter Jenny will be the sole beneficiary." He paused. "I understand," he said, typing something quickly into his screen. "You'll need to come in again with her for verification, but we can start that process today." I nodded. He clicked, printed, handed me forms. I signed each one without hesitation. For every pen stroke, a memory surfaced. A check for summer camp, a down payment on Brett's kitchen renovation, private tutors, dental work, a gym membership. Each signature, like a small burial, not of people, but of expectations. When it was done, Richard stood. "If I may say so," he began carefully, "you're doing something many people should have done sooner." "I know," I said, "but I was still hoping they'd turn around if I just gave more." He didn't respond, just nodded with a kind of quiet respect I hadn't felt in a long time. By the time I got home, the phone was ringing. I let it. Then a text came through from Laura. "Mert, this is really inappropriate. We need to talk. There are things you don't understand. You're making things complicated for everyone." I didn't answer. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang. I watched through the peephole. Brett. Alone. He looked unprepared. His hair messy, like he'd been running his hands through it. No kids this time. No props. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Mom," he said, "can I come inside?" "That depends," I said. You here to talk or to fix? He blinked. Talk, I guess. I stepped aside. Barely. He walked in slowly, like someone entering unfamiliar ground. The same house he once threw tantrums in, brought dates to, stored junk in the garage. Now he looked around like a guest. I got alerts this morning, he started, standing in the hallway. From the bank. Cards declined, bills bouncing. I know, I said. His voice hardened. You could have talked to me first. I did, for years, just not in the language you were listening to. He went quiet. Then, why would you cut off Jenny's school payment? She's still a minor. I didn't, I replied. Check again. That made him pause. You're giving her everything? No, I said. I'm giving her a chance. The rest of you already spent yours. His eyes narrowed. You're punishing us. I'm preserving myself. He started pacing. This is insane. Laura is going to lose her mind. We've built our life around those contributions. That's the problem, Brett. You built your life on something that wasn't yours. He stopped then, looked at me like he didn't recognize who I was. And maybe he didn't. But I did. You don't get to do this, Mom, Brett said, his voice rising just enough to tremble. This isn't how families work. I raised my eyebrows. No? And how do they work, Brett? Explain it to me. He opened his mouth, but no answer came. Just air, short and thin. We stood in the living room where George used to sing off-key to the radio, where Brett learned to walk, to lie, to apologize with flowers. I leaned against the table and folded my arms. You think I cut you off out of spite, I said. But I didn't. I did it out of clarity. And you should be grateful, really. Now you can finally prove how independent you are. He winced. This house, he began. This house, I interrupted, was bought with George's sweat and my stubbornness. This house has seen more of my knees than your hands. You want it? You earn one of your own. His jaw clenched. You're being vindictive. No, I'm being awake. He looked around the room, probably searching for something to anchor himself. Something familiar. But it wasn't his anymore. Maybe it never really was. Jenny's not going to understand, he tried. She already does, I said. She's the only one who ever asked how I was doing without needing something in return. He sank onto the couch, the same one he once spilled grape juice on as a child. I didn't offer him tea. I didn't offer him comfort. You could have talked to me, he said quietly. I know I haven't been perfect, but you blindsided us. I didn't respond right away. I watched him. A grown man who once clung to my hand crossing the street. A boy I loved more than breath, now looking at me like a stranger. You made it clear I was optional, I finally said. You closed the lid. You moved the money. You planned your future without asking if I had one. Silence. Then, so what now? You just cut us off forever? I didn't blink. For now, you can still call. You can still visit. But not for money. Not for inheritance. Not to play chess with my grief. He nodded slowly, like a man rehearsing surrender. When he finally stood up, I saw it. Something that wasn't anger or arrogance. It looked like shame, and I wasn't cruel enough to savor it. At the door, he paused. You know, I always thought Dad would have been proud of me. Of the life I built. I tilted my head. He might have been, if you'd built it with your own hands. Then I closed the door. The lock clicked. It was the first time I'd ever locked it behind him. Later that evening, Jenny called. Her voice was soft, like she already knew something had shifted. I saw Dad's face when he came home, she said. He didn't say anything, but I could tell. I didn't want to hurt him, I told her. I just couldn't keep bleeding. I know, Grandma. I really do. We stayed on the phone a while, talking about school, her part-time job, the garden she was starting from seed. She asked if she could visit over the weekend. You never have to ask, I said. After we hung up, I sat alone in the darkened living room. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I felt still, like the surface of a lake after the wind stops. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Not lonely, just empty in a way that felt honest. There was no artificial busyness, no phone calls about misplaced receipts or forgotten logins. No Laura asking if I could just handle the electric bill this month. It's been crazy. The silence wasn't punishment. It was space. For the first time in years, I moved at my own rhythm. I started each morning by opening every curtain in the house. Even the ones Brett used to complain made the room too hot. Sunlight streamed in, catching the dust I hadn't noticed before. I didn't rush to clean it. I just watched it float, weightless, suspended. I made my coffee exactly the way I liked it, strong, unsweetened, in George's chipped blue mug. I sat on the porch in my robe, waved at the mailman, read 2 chapters of a book without checking my phone. And when the phone did ring, I let it go to voicemail. On the 3rd day, I baked a peach cobbler, not for a guest, not for an event, just because it smelled like the summer George first kissed me, sticky and laughing on the back porch. I ate a small slice warm from the oven, standing barefoot in the kitchen. I even took a walk. The neighborhood had changed, of course. More SUVs, fewer kids on bikes. But Mrs. Coates still kept her yard immaculate, and someone had repainted the bench in the park where George used to feed the birds. I sat there for a while, watching squirrels argue over crumbs. When I came home, there was a letter in the mailbox. Not a bill, not junk. A real letter. Jenny. Her handwriting was messy and crammed, like she couldn't write fast enough. Dear Grandma, I just wanted to say again how proud I am of you. I know things are complicated right now, but I hope you know that I see you, not just as a grandmother, but as a whole person. You've always been strong, even when quiet. I've learned more from watching you than from any teacher. I'll be by Saturday. I'll bring the little seedlings we talked about. We can plant them together. Love always, Jenny. I held the letter for a long time, folded it twice, placed it beside George's watch on the windowsill. I didn't cry. I just let the quiet settle deeper into me. That evening, I went through my closet. Not to throw things out, but to choose what stayed. I picked a few things that felt like me, not just clothes people expected me to wear. A faded denim shirt George once said made me look like I meant business. A pair of worn boots I hadn't laced in years. Then I opened the cedar chest. Inside were letters, pictures, receipts from long-paid bills. One envelope held the insurance forms Brett had once asked me to sign just in case something happened. He'd said it so casually, over coffee. I'd signed without reading. I read it now. Buried in the legal language was a clause naming Brett as primary beneficiary on a policy George and I took out decades ago. A policy I hadn't even remembered we'd kept. It wasn't large, but it was mine, and now it would go where I said. I added it to the stack for Ruth. I was learning, slowly, that freedom doesn't come in one grand decision. It comes in dozens of small, quiet ones. Choosing your own coffee, opening your own curtains, saying no without explanation, and most of all, no longer asking to be seen. Jenny arrived Saturday morning just like she said. She rang the bell twice, always twice, and stood on the porch with a cardboard tray of seedlings and a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon. "I brought coffee, too," she said, lifting the cups. "Figured we could do it your way." I smiled. "Black?" "Of course." We sat at the kitchen table while the cobbler reheated in the oven. She looked tired, in that way young people do when they're juggling more than they're ready for. But her face was soft, calm. She didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. She just sat and listened while I told her how the garden used to look when her grandfather was alive. "There was a time," I said, "when George would come in from outside with his hands so dirty I had to threaten to spray him down before he touched anything. He'd plant everything too close together, said it made the flowers fight their way to greatness." Jenny laughed, warm and easy. "I like that. Feels like something he would say." We spent the next hour kneeling in the dirt, transplanting the little green starts she'd brought. Basil, tomatoes, a single stubborn squash. I hadn't knelt like that in years. My knees cracked, my back protested. But something in me stretched too, something that had been stiff for too long. Afterward, we sat on the porch with our coffee. Jenny looked out at the road. "Dad's still not talking much. He's confused, angry, maybe, but more confused than anything." I nodded. "He's used to thinking love and money are the same thing, that if I stopped giving one, the other vanished with it." "But it didn't," she said. "No," I agreed. "It didn't." She hesitated. "Do you ever think about how it got that way? With him?" "All the time," I said. "But not in the way people assume. I don't wonder what I did wrong. I wonder when I stopped asking for something back." She was quiet then. We both were. Later, she helped me wash up. We stood at the sink, hands in warm water, passing dishes without words. There was something ancient in that rhythm, something that felt older than either of us. Before she left, she gave me an envelope. "It's nothing serious," she said. "Just a class project. We had to write about someone who shaped us." Inside was a printed essay. 3 pages, double-spaced, with her name in the corner and the title, "Root Systems." I didn't read it until after she was gone. The first line made me pause. My grandmother taught me that silence isn't weakness, it's patience. And that dignity is not something you're given, it's something you reclaim. I read every word, twice, then folded it and placed it next to her letter in the drawer beside my bed. That night, I slept without pills. The garden soil still clung under my nails. My legs ached, but my chest felt light, like I'd spent years underwater and only just broken the surface. There were no missed calls from Brett, no messages from Laura, just a weather alert and a reminder to refill a prescription. I turned off the phone and left it on the counter. Let the silence do its work. Ruth's office was warmer this time, or maybe I was. She met me at the door with a firm handshake and a soft smile. "You look different, Myrta," she said, guiding me inside. "Calmer." "I suppose I am," I said. "Something settles when you finally stop asking to be seen." She nodded as if she knew exactly what I meant. We sat at the same desk, but now there was a folder between us with my name printed in clear black letters. Inside were documents I had reviewed, revised, and slept on. Nothing rushed, nothing done in a haze of grief or guilt. "This is the trust," Ruth said, sliding the first page forward. "Irrevocable, funded entirely by your remaining assets, named beneficiary, Jennifer Hale." I read every word, every clause. The language was dry, but the meaning pulsed underneath. "I don't want her to know yet," I said. "Not the whole of it. She's still young. She needs to live without the weight." "Understood. We can include stipulations for age-based access, educational milestones, anything you like." I chose 30. Not because I thought she'd need it then, but because I wanted her to arrive there on her own terms. With experience, not entitlement. The next page was the revised will. No room for ambiguity. No polite shares for children who treated me like an old appliance. Useful, then in the way. Meryl would get the photo albums. She'd know how to keep them. Brett. Nothing. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. He'd already taken more than his share. In silence, in assumptions, in the closing of lids and the changing of passwords. I signed the final page. Ruth stamped it. "There's one more thing," she said, opening a smaller envelope. "We discussed setting up a healthcare directive. It allows you to name someone to make decisions if you're incapacitated." "I want Jenny," I said. "She listens, even when it's hard." Ruth didn't ask why it wasn't Brett. Some things don't need explaining. We finalized everything. Copies printed, notarized, sealed. I tucked mine into a new folder, labeled it in bold pen. Mine. As I was leaving, Ruth stopped me. "You know," she said, "I don't get many clients your age who take this much control. Most wait until it's too late." "I waited long enough," I replied, "but not too long." When I got home, the house didn't feel like a holding space anymore. It felt chosen. Every photo still hanging was there because I wanted it. Every item in the fridge, something I'd picked. The pile of mail on the counter was mine to open or ignore. I sat in George's chair with a blanket across my knees, looked out the window at the garden where tiny green leaves had begun to push through the dirt. Jenny's seeds fighting their way to light. That evening, I made soup. Not for a visitor, not to impress, just because it warmed me. Halfway through, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Laura. Her makeup was perfect, as always, but her jaw was tight, her coat too crisp for the weather. "We need to talk," she said. "No," I replied. "You need to listen." She blinked, thrown off. "This isn't about money," she started. I didn't move from the doorway. "It's about how you've humiliated us," she continued. "Brett's a wreck. You blindsided him." "I clarified boundaries," I said. "If that wrecks him, he was never built well." Her eyes narrowed. "You're destroying this family." "No," I said, calm as the soup warming behind me. "I'm just refusing to be buried alive in it." She stared at me, waiting for me to soften, to apologize, to explain. I closed the door gently. This time, I didn't even lock it. Laura didn't call after that. She didn't text. But I knew she'd be back. Women like her don't walk away when they think there's still a chance to win. They retreat, regroup, and return with a sharper smile. She showed up 3 days later. This time she didn't wear her realtor heels or her tailored coat. She wore soft jeans and a cardigan the color of oatmeal. What she probably imagined would make her look approachable. She had a Tupperware container in her hands. "I brought banana bread," she said, as if that could erase decades of extraction. "I don't eat banana bread," I replied. Her smile faltered. "Oh," I thought, "well, it's Brett's favorite. Then you can take it home." She didn't move. "Can I come in?" "No." She stood there for a moment, weighing her next move. "I want to understand," she said finally. "What changed? You were always so generous." "That wasn't generosity," I said. "That was appeasement. There's a difference." She flushed slightly. "You're angry." I'm lucid. Laura exhaled sharply through her nose. We've had our differences, but I never thought you'd cut us out of everything. Not us, I corrected. You. Brett. The difference is specific. Her face stiffened. You think Jenny's better than us, she said, bitterness bleeding through the sugar coating. No, I said. I think she hasn't yet forgotten how to see people as people. Laura's voice dropped. You're punishing Brett because he was trying to manage things. He stepped up. After George got sick, he took responsibility. He took control, I said, and he used it like a silent crowbar, little by little, not to help, but to own. Silence. She set the banana bread on the porch rail like a white flag. I don't want to fight, she said. You already did, I said softly. You just thought I'd never swing back. She stared at me for a long time, and in her expression I saw something new. Not anger, not confusion. Panic. The kind people feel when they realize the person they underestimated just stood up and walked out of their narrative. Then she tried one last time. I know you think we've been unfair, but everything we did was to keep the family strong. No, I said. You did it to keep the power centralized and the costs invisible. Her mouth opened, then closed. She picked up the banana bread and turned without another word. I watched her walk down the driveway, watched the way she checked her phone before she even reached the car, looking for someone to agree with her version of the story. But I didn't care about that anymore. Inside, the kettle was whistling. I made tea, carried it to the porch, and sat watching the shadows stretch across the lawn. The tomato sprouts Jenny and I had planted were reaching, not tall yet, but upright, determined. I thought of George. He would have said, "Took you long enough, Mert." And I would have said, "You hush. I got here, didn't I?" That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from worry. From remembering. I opened the cedar chest again, the one George built when Meryl was born. Inside, under the quilts and birth certificates, were letters I hadn't touched in years. Some were yellowed, some bent at the corners. A few were in George's hand, crooked, sometimes too large, but always careful. He wrote slowly, like he was carving. One was from 1974. He'd gone to visit his sick mother and left me alone with 2 children under 5. I was tired, angry, still nursing, and he knew it. Mert, I don't say it enough, but you're the engine in this house. I see the way you fold socks like it matters, the way you keep us full, clean, alive. When I'm back, I promise I'll start asking you how you are before I ask what's for dinner. G. I held the paper like it might still be warm from his hands. I didn't cry. That stage had passed. But something swelled in my chest. Grief not as pain, but as presence. I read another, from the early 90s, when I'd gone to stay with Meryl after her miscarriage. Mert, the garden misses you. The bed misses you. And I miss you. The stew's too salty. I'll eat it anyway. Come home soon. Your George. I put the letters back one by one, smoothed them flat. Then I added Jenny's essay to the same chest. It belonged with the rest, not because it was from the past, but because it carried something forward. Before bed, I walked through the house. Each room now held something I had chosen to keep. Nothing excess. No junk drawers filled with other people's schedules. In the living room, I dusted the shelf that held the old black and white photo of George on his first motorcycle. He looked like a man who knew how to live, like a man who would have stood behind me now and said, "Let him look confused. You earned your place." I sat down in the armchair. held the picture a little longer than usual, and for the first time in a long time, I spoke to him out loud. "You were wrong, you know. I didn't need saving. I just needed time." The next morning, I wrote letters of my own. One to Jenny. Not about the trust, not about money, but about strength. I told her stories she'd never heard. About the day George proposed. About the time I nearly left him. About how we stayed. Not because it was easy, but because we kept showing up. I told her what it means to take up space without apology. Then I wrote to Merrill. A short letter. Not accusing, not cold. Just open. "You were always the quiet one. I wonder if that's why I let the noise come from everyone else. I miss you. Not the daughter in Oregon. The one who used to hum while she helped me shell peas. Write when you can. Mom." I didn't write Brett. Not yet. Some bridges burned because someone lit a match, others because no one bothered to tend them. I hadn't seen Marge in almost a year. She lived 3 houses down, on the corner with the mailbox that always leaned left. Her husband died 5 winters ago. After that, she stopped coming to church and started wearing her hair down, long and gray, like she no longer had to keep it tidy for anyone. We used to sit together on holidays, exchange casseroles. Then time crept in, and so did distance. I saw her again on a Wednesday morning. She was walking her dog, an old mutt named Duke that had survived more than either of us expected. I was trimming the wild vine near the porch, the one George always said would eat the whole damn house if you let it. "Myrta," she said, stopping at the gate. "You look taller." "I didn't shrink this week," I said. "That's all." She laughed. "Well, you're standing different, that's for sure." We talked about the weather, the squirrels, how the mail came later now. Then, without warning, she said, "I heard Laura was out here." I didn't pretend otherwise. She was. And? She left with her banana bread. Marge nodded, like that was enough explanation. She leaned on the fence post. Duke laid down with a sigh. "I know what you're doing," she said, her voice low. "And I want to say, it's brave." "It's overdue," I replied. "Same thing at our age." She looked down the street, then back at me. "You remember when Henry passed?" "The week after, my oldest son called to ask where I kept the keys to the camper. Never said sorry, just wanted to know if he could take it upstate with his friends." "I remember," I said. "I told him the locks had changed. He didn't call again for 3 months." I didn't say anything, just listened. Marge adjusted her scarf. "You know what got me," she continued. "Not the silence, the surprise. I thought I'd raised them better. Turns out I'd just raised them soft. Comfortable. That word again. Comfortable. It's not the same as safe. Or kind. I don't want to leave this world tired," I told her. "Or confused." "No," she said. "You want to leave like you lived, once you remembered how." She looked at me then, not as a neighbor, but as something closer. A mirror, maybe. "Can I come by tomorrow?" she asked. "I'll bring real tea." "I'll make cobbler," I said. We smiled, like survivors. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with the letters I'd written, but not mailed. Held them in my lap like warm stones. The tomatoes in the garden were finally beginning to thicken. The squash looked like it might outgrow its box. Everything reaching. Everything growing. Not because someone told it to, but because it was planted right. The wind picked up. I tucked the letters back into their envelopes. Then I went inside and swept the floor. Not for anyone. Just because I wanted a clean path forward. It was Brett who broke the silence. 2 weeks had passed since the last visit, since the door closed with no apologies and no promises. I hadn't expected anything more from him. But one evening, just as the light turned soft across the kitchen tiles, my phone buzzed. A message. "I cleaned out Dad's toolbox today. Thought you might want something from it." I stared at the screen. Simple. No guilt, no sarcasm. But also no, "How are you?" No, "Sorry." Just a nudge, a tether. I didn't reply right away. I made myself tea, finished folding the laundry, then walked out to the garage where George's own tools still hung in perfect rows. He'd labeled everything, bent labels, fading ink, but still there. Wrench, bike tape, not the good kind screws, no matches here. Even in his system, there was humor. I didn't need anything from Brett's cleaned-out box. I had the real thing. But something in the message stirred a corner of my mind I'd tucked away. George had always wanted Brett to understand tools. "Every man should know how to fix what he breaks," he used to say, "even if it's just a hinge." But Brett never had the hands for it. He wanted finished things, no rust, no dust, no patience. Maybe that was the difference. Later that night, I replied, "Thank you. I have all I need here." No more, no less. He didn't write again, but the next morning, a small package was on my doorstep. No note, just a worn leather roll tied with string. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside were George's old screwdrivers, the set he always kept in the glove compartment of the truck. They smelled faintly of oil and eucalyptus, the scent of 1,000 small repairs. I held them in my hands, not for use, for memory. That day, Jenny came again. She brought groceries she thought I needed, I didn't, and wildflowers she picked from the trail near her apartment, I did. We cooked lunch together. Nothing fancy, just lentils and toast with garlic butter. But the way she moved around the kitchen, like she belonged, reminded me how love works best when it doesn't ask for proof. "Have you thought about seeing them?" she asked carefully. "Dad, Meryl, even Laura." I paused. "I've seen them," I said. "For years. They just haven't been looking back." She nodded. "I know." We ate on the porch, the garden blooming behind us. Her hair was tied up in a messy knot, just like I used to wear mine when I was her age. It struck me how much she carried that none of them had ever earned from me, but she gave it anyway. "I think about him a lot," she said softly. "Grandpa, I didn't get to say goodbye." "They closed the coffin," I said. "They closed a lot of things." She looked at me, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet reverence. "I'm glad you opened something back up." That evening, after she left, I walked the perimeter of the yard, checked the fencing, pulled a few weeds, picked a handful of ripe cherry tomatoes, too warm, too sweet, just right. Then I stood in the driveway where George used to park the truck, where Brett had once learned to ride his bike, where Laura had staged family photos with everyone smiling in ways we didn't always feel. The wind moved through the leaves. No drama, just movement. Inside, I made myself a note. Finalize update with Ruth. Prep donation boxes. Keep the screwdrivers. Some things didn't need to go. Some things had earned their place. The house is quieter now, but it no longer feels like absence. It feels like presence, finally given room. In the mornings, I still open all the curtains. I sweep the floor whether it needs it or not. I cook for one without apology. I don't check my phone first thing. I don't wait for a knock that never comes. I don't listen for footsteps that stopped long ago. The porch has become my favorite place. I sit with a blanket, sometimes with a book, sometimes just with breath. The wind speaks in a language I finally have time to learn. I've started naming the birds, not with real names, with the ones I think they'd pick for themselves. The bossy one is Midge. The solemn one near the feeder is Walter. There's peace in that kind of foolishness. Ruth came by last week. She brought copies of everything: the finalized trust, the updated will, the notarized letter naming Jenny my healthcare proxy. We sat at the table where George and I once played rummy with sticky fingers and mismatched decks. She handed me the folder. "You've got it all locked down now," she said. "Solid and clear." "I didn't want to win anything," I told her. "Just wanted not to disappear." "You didn't," she said. "Not even close." When she left, I placed the folder in the chest, right beside George's letters, Jenny's essay, my own quiet resolve. Yesterday, Meryl called. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't explain why so many years had passed in silence. She just said, "I was thinking about Dad, and then about you." "I'm here," I said. "I know," she replied. "I think I finally understand what that means." We didn't stay on the phone long, but something passed between us. Not repair, not yet, but recognition. Sometimes that's enough. As for Brett, I haven't heard from him in weeks. That's all right. Sometimes sons return. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the most maternal thing you can do is let them face the echo of their own choices, without rushing in to dampen it. Jenny visits often. She brought a radio last time. Old, with a wood frame and a crackling knob. We tuned it to an oldies station and listened to Sam Cooke while planting the second round of beans. She sings while she digs. She sings off-key, just like George did. One evening, we sat in silence until she said, "You ever think about moving? Somewhere smaller?" I smiled. "No, this house still remembers me." She nodded. "Then I'll keep remembering it too." When she left, I watched her car pull away until the red lights curved around the corner. Then I stepped back inside and made myself a small dinner. Toast, tea, a few leftover peaches. The mail brought nothing urgent, just a circular for gutter cleaning and a birthday card from the pharmacy. I left both unopened. Before bed, I walked through each room, not to check, to greet. Each space holds something now that belongs only to me. The blue mug in the kitchen, the photo of George in the hallway, the screwdrivers in the drawer, the corner of the garden where the squash keeps taking over. This life is mine again. Not loud, not final, but whole. And if someone reading this thinks it's a revenge story or a tale of triumph, they're missing the point. It's a story of someone staying, of not being erased, of blooming, late, quiet, and entirely on her own terms. So if you're here now, listening, and you've ever been folded small to make room for someone else's comfort, let me tell you something clearly. You still belong, even if they close the lid, especially then.